Pay attention, son. This is the part of the story that's really important. Now, this is the law of the jungle, as old and as true as the sky. The wolf that shall keep it may prosper, but the wolf that shall break it must die.
Bungie's brought millions of people together through their Destiny franchise with creativity, core mechanics of their gameplay, and outstanding artistic ability. Today, we go down the road of evolution for their characters Bladedancer and Arcstrider in the light of PvP throughout both Destiny 1 and Destiny 2's Crucible. As early as 2013, we began to learn about character developments such as the Warlock, Titan, and fan favorite Hunter. Each little note sent out by Bungie would give a sneak peek into what we might be able to do with these characters, and of course, we could always count on Dado to catch them. A year before the game's release, he was already coining the name of Bladedancer's teleporting ability, Blink.
Who seems to be a hunter based on armor. Bam! New ability. At first, it looks like a blink ability, but the way the camera is angled, I can't tell if this is a blink, a teleport, or possibly an invisibility move.
Fast forwarding to 2014, and not so sure if you've heard of him, but some fella named Ninja gave a taste of what the alpha was like.
You can only pick Control, which is the only game type that's available. However, there are 6. I believe they're going to release more of that in the beta or the actual game.
You sure about that, Ninja? Bladedancer wasn't actually available in that alpha or the beta because it was locked behind level 15, which you couldn't really get to quick enough no matter how many Red Bulls you would have drank, but boy was the hunter fun. With the chains off our wrists, it was only a matter of time before people unlocked Hunter's second subclass, the Bladedancer. Back then, your Guardian's character still had the 6 traits like today's game, but they weren't all determined by our armor stats. The character screen traits were still intellect, strength, and discipline, but they worked quite a bit different, so let me break them down. Stats were still driven by armor and RNG. It varied across the types, like green being common, blue uncommons, purple legendaries, etc. At scratch, your level was very low and armor was extremely basic. A green armor drop would give a single stat like plus 15 strength or maybe 18 discipline. Like, that's it. As you progressed over time, you'd start to see those blues and legendaries drop, which were much better. You could see plus 40, plus 50 in 2 character traits at the same time, or even over 100 stat points in 1. Just like today, the sum of all of your armor led to a cumulative total across those 3 traits. The cap for each one in the beginning was 275. What's kind of neat is that there were no tiers back then. Every single stat point made a difference. Now, what about those other 3 that we're used to though? Mobility, resilience, and recovery. Those weren't based on your armor stats, and they were actually named agility instead of mobility, armor instead of resilience, and then recovery was the same. Rather than having set skill trees to choose from for your subclass, you actually had this like skill matrix, if you will, with lots of options. We're gonna go through the perk nodes that you had on Bladedancer soon, but first, take a look at the top of the screen. You'll see some bars for armor, recovery, and agility. Bungie actually had their own ideas on what characters should be, so their base stats were all different from the get-go. An example is how Titan was seen as the tank, right? So it would naturally have high armor or resilience, but then lower recovery and agility. Warlocks were a bit more balanced, and Hunters were heavy in the agility spectrum. Because of this, some characters couldn't reach the minimums or the maximums that others could. That being said, there were still ways to manipulate what you had at base, and in fact, there are 8 columns on screen here, right, showing 27 total nodes? Well, 10 of these nodes would actually add or reduce stats for those 3 traits at the top. You were given 2 full columns, so 6 different nodes dedicated to that stat split, and then 4 other perk nodes that we're going to get into soon had secondary impacts. For example, in column 5, you might pick Path Forgotten. That was a boost to agility and armor, but not recovery. If you went with Path Forbidden, it would be agility and recovery, but not armor. You would pick your 2 nodes for those 2 columns, and then for those 4 other perks that I mentioned had secondary impacts on your stats, let's take the jump for example. If you liked your jump to have stronger directional control, then you would have selected the better control node. Well, that would give you a +1 to recovery. If you liked Blink, however, no dice, no +1 to that stat. Regarding stat splits, it was no different than today. What's the meta? What should I run? What might be to your surprise though is that in the more competitive side of PvP early on, recovery wasn't actually highly sought after like it is today. Bladedancer was all agility based, and if you chose every node that would push you towards the agility stat, then the other two would just end up being a byproduct. I'd say the most common setup you saw in the beginning was this on screen from Sir Demetrius: high mobility, middle of the run resilience, and low recovery. As people became aware of the benefits of recovery over the course of the game, this would slowly evolve, but this was definitely the go-to in the beginning. It's safe to say hunters were already running rampant in the Crucible just a few months into the launch of Destiny, and Bladedancer was by far a fan favorite, so let's go through why. In column 1 you had your grenades, the typical Flux, Skip, or Arc Bolt grenade. All the concepts are the same, but boy was Arc Bolt a meta pick in early D1. Initially, people were glued to using the Lucky Raspberry with it. That exotic chest piece not only increased the chain count, but also extended the range a lot. And that wasn't it either. The biggest part of the perk was the fact that you started with a grenade every time you spawned up. It was the ultimate trials tool for crushing around in 10 seconds or even clutching a 1v3, because these didn't deal 91 like they did today. No, they dealt 122. I literally remember a friend of mine saying I got thorn bolted again, and the first time I heard that I had to look back, and it was because you could shoot someone once with the thorn, throw the grenade while backpedaling, and you'd guarantee the kill. Alright, column 2 were your jumps. That top circle just meant that you had unlocked it, and the little arrow pointing down were your 3 options. Higher jump and better control were just like today's high jump and strafe jump, but the head turner was blink. Man, was it ever good. We'll talk more about this in a bit, but column 3 was your super, and you actually had 3 ways to tweak the secondary attack based on whatever you preferred. First off, I'll just clarify, you did not have a staff back in D1. It was called Arc Blade for a reason. You literally had blades that acted like super extending one-hit melees. I'd be lying if I said it didn't have hit registration problems, but it was insane when you were on the good side of latency. The first choice to elevate your super was called Showstopper. This wasn't used much in PvP, it was more so a PvE perk. You could do this like twirl animation and damage a bunch of people around you, which sounds awesome, but realistically you had to get up really close to a bunch of people and they all had to be kind of within that same range simultaneously. Moving on to option 2 was Razor's Edge. This was a top pick. If you were chasing someone with your super, or maybe they were just too far away and you didn't think you could close that gap, Razor's Edge was like a wave of energy you could send along the ground to kill them. Think Tempest Strike, but in your super. The utility of this was super good and then became truly elevated by another perk that you're going to see in a minute. Third option to tweak your super was Vanish. This also wasn't used in PvP that much, but worth noting it was king in PvE, and I'd like my Crota friends to say hello in the comments, please. On to column 4 with the melee. Blink Strike was at base a powerful melee with extended range. Not to mention the 3 sub perks that you could choose to accompany with it. First one was called Backstab. Oh, good old Backstab. Anyone remember how often this saved them by glitching? The intent was for you to have a lot more damage, enough to kill someone when hitting them square in the back. Memes would have their way with this one though because of how often it procced from the front. Bungie once identified it as being some sort of hitbox warping issue, but nonetheless it was glorious and what most people rocked in PvP. Escape Artist was another PvE gem. Hit someone with your charged melee and you go invisible, plain and simple. Fast Twitch was probably a close second for PvP simply because it reduced the cooldown of your melee a lot, but it still took a backseat to the strength of backstab. Column 6. This was, let's just say, dexterity based, I guess. These choices were stacked. First off, you had fleet-footed. Imagine having Stompy's level sprint speed and slide distance, but it's just intrinsic to your character. This was so strong and people like Poshy couldn't take it off. Truly a shotgunner's dream. If that wasn't enough, how about your next option being pre-nerf quick draw on every single weapon? I think everyone knows just how strong that is nowadays. And then in option 3, as always, a nice pick for PvE in Shadowjack. With multiple ways to go invisible on this subclass, here was a method to extend the duration of that invisibility. Finally, that brings us to column number 8, which, believe it or not, included more ways to elevate your super. For quite a while, the community, I would say, is split on this one. You had Encore, which was like Bottom Tree Striker nowadays, where getting a kill in your super extends your super. This was undoubtedly big for quick play, and a lot of people did love it. But at the bottom, you had something called Hungering Blade. This is what eventually took the cake. It was just too strong and provided 3 different ways to get your health back. When you would be in your super, you would get your health back for every single kill, which basically made you unstoppable anyways, and that alone would have been enough for me to choose it. But it also activated on Razor's Edge, so you know how I talked about that wave of energy? Well, if you saw someone that was weak, you could send that off while you were kind of backpedaling or dipping behind cover, and all of a sudden get your health back instantly when it hit them. Thirdly was the icing on the cake and how it linked with Blink Strike, that backstab, front killing glitch melee, while you could get your health to regen after getting that kill. What a treat. Finally was, yep, you guessed it, a PvE option in Stalker. This was another way to go invisible just by crouching in one place, and hugely advantageous within PvE. Bladedancer was quickly rising to the top in Destiny's first year, largely due to Blink Shoddy. Not sure if you've heard the term spare benders, but it's because of how strong the combination of spare rations and mind benders was for a stretch in D2. Well, think that, but for blade dancers using a shotgun and their blink jump. See, at release, for many months, the blink jump was superior to what we know today. Your blink back then was almost instant, so imagine hitting your button to jump and having 0 delay. On top of that was how quick you could shoot your weapon coming out of the blink. Like right now there's a pause, right? But back then, not only could you pull out the weapon right away, you could even shoot before the animation finished. Pair that with 30 FPS on console and it was fairly game breaking. July was the first sneak peek that some kind of nerf was on its way someday when Bungie's senior design lead, Sage Merrill, sorry if I got that wrong, said he needed to figure out how to make Blink less frustrating to fight against. Too many people were showing up at their desk asking when they'd remove it.
Guardians are fighting on Earth and beyond. Join them. Push back the darkness.
At the release of Taken King in September of 2015, there were some changes finally made, but were they really enough? If we look at the patch notes and focus on how hunters were changed, to no surprise, look at this long list on Bladedancer. 6 nerfs to that subclass, while Gunslinger only had 1 tweak. Here are the main takeaways. See, not only was Blink an aggressive player's dream, but it was also a get out of jail free card. Because it activated so fast, like I mentioned earlier, you could dip from any situation backwards with no harm. The movement delay nerf here was basically Bungie's attempt to try and hamper that playstyle or the fact that you had that get out of jail free card. They made it so you couldn't teleport after a hop so quickly. The effects change was more so for the opponents. Remember that dado clip I showed at the beginning with how hard it was to see the person teleporting? Well, they added a visual trail so that you could at least have some sort of trigger to your brain on where they would pop up. I guess you could compare it to Wraith in Apex Legends when you're following that trail, or I suppose Baccarus nowadays in D2. And then there was the arc bolt damage. That went way down and its range was reduced too. The 2 of these hits combined finally took care of that annoying Lucky Raspberry meta in every single Trials match. Lastly, what we haven't talked much about was the Flux Grenade. They actually had the foresight to know that Flux Nades tracked way too intensely even though they weren't seen as much. I think they knew that with arc bolt usage going down, Flux Nades would shoot through the roof. Walla and Pashi were notorious for how many kills they could get with this damn Flux Nade. It pains me thinking back on how many sticky kills I've seen Walla snag on Twitch back then. With those 3rd subclasses released back in September, it was no secret that Night Stalker was eating up usage in the Crucible, but did it truly make a dent to our beloved Arcstrider? What people tend to forget is that although Shadestep became incredible eventually, it was initially a tougher class to master. It was less aggressive and much more of a neutral game subclass. Because of this, it was far from goodbye for Bladedancer in year 2 of Destiny 1. This graph is a snapshot of playtime in 2016, and it shows the average KD of all 9 subclasses, meaning across all players in the game with every range of skill. Bladedancer and Gunslinger were still outperforming the rest. Maybe that good old paddle glitch on Shadestep hadn't reached the masses yet, eh? No matter how cool the new subclasses were, you just couldn't forget how powerful those perk nodes were on Bladedancer. For this very reason, Bungie hit Bladedancer again. Now by this time, people were starting to appreciate recovery a bit more in PvP, and they realized that, so they actually made a -1 recovery stat to the Blink node. If you recall, better control jump gave +1, so now choosing Blink meant a double hit in that regard. Next on their chopping block was Blink Strike, that oh so powerful melee. They reduced the range to be less oppressive and then tried to fix backstab to not proc from the front. Good guy Dukinus demonstrated that tick rate and latency were still king though, and front stab would in fact remain.
Now take a look at these clips. This poor Bladedancer is coming straight at me. I hit him with a shotgun blast and then very clearly get him with a 182 yellow damage front stab. Backstab works from the front, but does it work from the back? I have the double melee gauntlets on in this clip and both melees are charged. And then approach the next player from directly behind him. Look, I could not be more centered behind this guy. I melee him and the backstab doesn't kick in.
Next up was the super. Most people would just spam that blade swipe to cover a gap. It was effective because it was really quick and it didn't really burn that much super anyways, so Bungie made it use 20% every time you did that going forward. The other thing to mention here is the 0.8 second delay between the swings in the air, because not only did people spam it on the ground, they would often blink up in the air and then spam in the air to cover their ground. This was an attempt to try and prevent that. Bladedancer remained popular going forward after this, but it was safe to say this finally brought the reins in for Nightstalker to start shining. With the mass population learning the tricks you could pull off with Shadestep, the directional jump using Bones of Ao, Bladedancer would live the remainder of its D life a fan favorite but not oppressive. And the only thing I really remember getting changed after that was in early 2017, where Bungie made a few tweaks to Hungering Blade and Quick Draw.
Let's get to it, Guardian.
As we were all getting tired of sticky nades in D1, at least we had D2 around the corner, right? Getting closer and closer to Destiny 2, folks were realizing that characters weren't changing. Same old Hunter, Warlock, and Titan. Getting into the classes, they were similar in concept. You had Arc Bladedancer, Arcstrider, but they were different in their own respects. Invites were sent out to some of the larger content creators in April of 2017 for them to all head down to the Jet Center in LA to play D2 early on.
The Jet Center. I'm going to the Jet Center in LA, Hawthorne, California, on May 18th to play Destiny 2 early.
At that first event, Arcstrider wasn't actually available, but our first real good look was at E3 in June later on that year, where people were able to play it on the floor. This is when excitement really started to ramp up, and then the beta released shortly after that, where everyone could get their hands on it. Initial impressions were decent for the most part. People were definitely enjoying Arcstrider relative to the other classes, especially with how you could do some combos in the super, and it was just something brand new and shiny. In fact, look at this combo attack specifically that was in the beta. Can anyone tell me if that was there on day 1 of release?
Anyone want a hug? Hugs?
Destiny 2 launched on September 6th, 2017, but for console only. It was a bit odd that PC had to wait until October 24th, but hey, I'm just the messenger. Although people had their concerns after the beta, we all know that 6 weeks isn't enough to overhaul a game, and hype remained fairly high. To nobody's surprise, matches were full of hunters at the release. Bladedancers with a dodge? Gunslinger with a dodge? Wait, you can reload by dodging? These were some new and cool changes, so let's jump into what was available at the launch. First diamond was your super. That's no different now. They gave us the same grenades in skips, fluxes, which didn't one hit anymore, and then arc bolt. The primary change was on the left hand side, which is when Bungie took the shade step feature from D1 Night Stalker and made it intrinsic to all hunters. Splitting it into the two options to either reload or recharge your melee was a pretty cool feature. 2 of the 3 jumps remained the same, but instead of blink, they gave us triple jump. I'd say people initially thought, oh my god, maybe this is like Bones of AO, but the reality is that directional control is just too good to give up in strafe jump. Now the real juice is obviously where the perks are, and instead of those 24 nodes that you could choose from before, this time you only had 2. I'm going to assume those of you watching this either play or have played D2, so I'm not going to go through all those perks within the 2 trees, but notice anything different? Take a good look at the perks right now and let me know if you catch it compared to today. What's worth noting anyway is that there were 2 main schools of thought at release. On one hand, you went from 81 possible combinations in D1 all the way down to 2. Way of the Warrior and Way of the Wind. That's it. People did argue that once a meta was decided in D1, it didn't really matter because you'd only have 3 or 4 combinations out of those 81, which is fair, but this was still pretty shocking to the community. I personally think they took creativity away from us, and I'm probably going to get flack for saying this next part, but I believe it's because the community begged for D2 to be competitive. To be clear, I was one of them, and all I ever wanted was to see Destiny's incredible core mechanical gameplay get some spotlight in a competitive sense. Things like taking RNG out of the equation and allowing absolute skill to determine the outcome of an engagement, making a sticky grenade not one-hit kill was a perfect example. I believe Bungie tried to respond to a lot of what the community was saying, and as a result, released a stale game. Static rolls, less diversity in each other's builds, super weak abilities that almost never popped up. It was all likely an unfortunate and incorrect execution at an attempt to answer what the community wanted. That's enough of a tangent for me though, and I'd say the main issue was how slow the game felt. Listen to this clip from Sir Demetrius. It blew my mind when Books and I found it. Sawyer, by the way, if you're watching this, you literally predicted the future.
In my opinion, they can do one of 2 things. One of them is more practical and the other one is just, I think would be really cool. The first thing would be obvious, and that would just be to increase your movement speed, because I feel like the main time I struggle with it is like you just can't get to people quick enough. They just run away from you. However, on the other hand, there would be a cool ability you could add. It would kind of be like an ionic blink, but it reminded me of Infamous, which is a game that's exclusive to PlayStation, I think. The main character, Delson, I don't know what type of name that is, but he does like this phase shift ability. It's kind of like an ionic blink, so it would basically function the same way as ionic blink, except the animation would be a little bit different, obviously. So
now thinking back, there were actually some really good positives to Destiny at the launch, like how much those abilities didn't matter, right? Compared to Shatter Dive right now. I think it was Triple Wreck though who once said it can be as balanced as possible, but if the game lacks hero moments, then it'll never satisfy the entertainment side. He really wasn't wrong. Those were tough to come by with slow time to kills and clutches never really happening. With enough community uproar, and maybe more so the community quite literally leaving for other games like Fortnite, Bungie actually hinted pretty early on what we now remember as the Go Fast update.
It's time, Guardian.
4 months later, and it was here. I remember I was personally on a break from Destiny, completely consumed by the skill gap that Fortnite was providing, but then I would see all this chatter on Twitter around this Go Fast update. I have to give serious props to Bungie on this one. They did a massive overhaul on their game. It was truly night and day if you compare the two. They made over 250 changes to the game, including weapons, movement, abilities, you name it. And to focus on the Arcstrider specifically, these are what happened. The super regeneration bar became faster, meaning we no longer had entire matches with nothing, and then all of a sudden a million supers popped all at the same time. This one sounds minimal, but was actually a game changer with the fact that walking and strafe speed were improved. On top of that, one of Arcstrider's biggest issues was how slow it was, so now you had faster sprint speed while you were in that super. And for the hardcores out there, they also improved the acceleration, so you'd basically reach your max sprint speed right away. The arc staff dodging within the super became faster. The staff melees were made quicker. Another cool change was that you no longer had that mini delay between your attacks. They also increased the area of effect on the arc staff attack in order to try and reduce those short stops. The mods for your armor went up nearly 20% each. And overall, the list on this patch was just massive. It felt like players were finally ready to give Destiny 2 the real shot that we were all hoping for.
Hunters. Quick on their feet. Quicker on the draw.
It was safe to say the Go Fast update held people's attention for quite a while, but Bungie knew that that wouldn't be enough, and as a result, added middle trees to all 9 classes. For Arcstrider, same story here, most of you are aware of our current 3 trees, but in summary, you had the top tree with perks very concentric to the melee thanks to Deadly Reach, Combination Blow, and Combat Flow. Bottom tree had the ultimate neutral game and survivability, so Bungie wanted to mix things up and add Way of the Current in the middle tree. Tempest Strike was a cool new ability to send a wave of melee energy along the ground, likely inspired by D1's Razor's Edge. Lightning Weave provided an alternative to reload mods with getting melee hits, ebb and flow along the vein of disorienting your opponents in an aggressive manner, and then the pinnacle of it all, Whirlwind Guard. One of the coolest additions to the game. Of course, our trusty Fallout plays had fun testing this, similar to how he's done his old school bubble videos. The thing could block so much in the game, like the ability to spin your arc staff and just clutch against pretty much everything coming at you was such a cool feeling. Back then, one of the core game modes was Countdown, and this provided a means to defuse the bomb while staying alive, which our good friend ZK proved to do many times over. Fast forwarding 8 months or so, it was time for some changes again though. The Go Fast update was great, but it was a year old now. Forsaken was incredible, but metas had developed and things needed to be tweaked. While Bungie felt Middle Tree's Way of the Current was fine, top and bottom were actually underutilized, so they took action. Loving that top tree revolved around the melee, they doubled down by allowing that bonus damage to stack 3 times with even more damage per melee given the circumstances. On top of that, they took a page out of the Wormhusk's book and improved the healing from it as well. One of the more important changes was increasing Deadly Reach's duration to make it more usable and then keeping the buff regardless of hitting your melee. On the other end of the spectrum, with Bottom Tree that emphasizes quick movement and thriving under pressure, they buffed Disorienting Blow, the dodge recharge while sprinting from focused breathing, the ability charge while wounded, and by far the most significant improvement was the bump to 40% resistance while dodging. That single-handedly brought this subclass to a new level in scrims. While we all know the role and strength of Spectral Blades throughout the entire Shadowkeep era, within the Arcstrider's 3 choices, it was clear that Bottom Tree was the go-to for competitive play, and as a result, Bungie took to the drawing board yet again. In February of 2020, to try and bring ability charges down, Focused Breathing had a slight delay added from sprinting, as well as the rate of return that it would give you. Combat Meditation's melee charge was reduced, and the strongest aspect, Lightning Reflexes, was also brought to, I'd say, more of a happy medium. It was clear, I think, from the beginning that 25% damage resistance while you were dodging was too little, but then that 40% that they brought it up to back in April of 2019 was way too much, so they ended up just splitting it down the middle and sticking with 32% damage resistance. For Middle Tree with Tempest Strike, that melee energy wave was hitting a little too often, so they actually adjusted the targeting angle to go down, which basically meant it wouldn't hit as often. And then let's not forget the infinite dodge glitch after the super. Thanks, Cheese, for always pointing those out.
For Arcstrider, pop your super, switch your primary, and before your super runs out, keep hitting dodge. As long as you keep dodging, you can melee in between, allowing you to do some damage while dodging infinitely.
Stasis. This subclass came into Destiny like a bull in a china shop. There was nothing you could do to combat Revenant. Arcstrider and his lighter peers were a thing of the past. Been a long year of gradual nerfs to our icy subclass, which has undoubtedly allowed Arc to slowly shine again, but I do believe there's a ways to go still. Joe Blackburn, game director of Destiny 2, left the community with quite the thread on Twitter back in August of 2021. In it, he discussed many facets to the direction of our PvP environment, and part of that is balancing of subclasses. Bringing the top performing ones down a notch and the bottom performing ones up a notch will all be in an attempt for further balance in the future. Following that August 4th tweet was a TWAB just 24 hours later. General notes from Sandbox lead Kevin Yanes described their vision as abilities only complementing gunplay, not the other way around. Much of this is still to come, but in Season 15 we did see changes to several abilities and supers. Notably around Arcstrider, we're boosting top and middle tree by pumping up Deadly Reach to 10 seconds and creating a link between Tempest Strike's wave attack with Lightning Weave's reload mechanic with extension options. On top of this, it was still pretty well known that the super was just peanuts compared to something like Spectral Blade, so the super was lengthened and the heavy slam radius was bumped up 20%. At the end of the day, I'm proud that I play Destiny for what it brings us. Through all of the ups and downs, I'm constantly reminded just how many ways there are to enjoy it, and if there's one thing I can say with confidence, it's that Bladedancer and Arcstrider have brought depth to the Crucible for many years. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing, sharing it with your friends, and on screen are 2 other pieces I've made in the past. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one if you subscribe.